Picture yourself walking through the crowded streets of ancient Rome. The air is thick with tension. Hungry citizens gather in alleyways, whispering of rebellion. The mighty empire seems to be teetering on the edge of chaos. But wait, what's that sound in the distance? The roar of the crowd erupts from the Colosseum, and suddenly the whispers of rebellion fade away. The aroma of fresh bread wafts through the streets as grain carts make their daily rounds. This is no accident, my friends. This is perhaps the most brilliant and darkest strategy ever devised to control an empire. Welcome to Imperium Chronicles. I'm your host, and today we're diving into one of history's most fascinating tales of power and manipulation, Rome's infamous bread and circuses policy. Imagine being an emperor, ruling over 1 million restless citizens. Your people are hungry, angry, and ready to revolt. What do? Well, the Romans had a solution that would shock modern sensibilities but proved incredibly effective. Keep their bellies full and their minds distracted. But this isn't just a story about free food and entertainment. This is a tale of psychological warfare on a massive scale. How did Rome's rulers transform potential revolutionaries into docile spectators? What made this strategy so effective that it kept the peace for centuries? The answer lies in a fascinating mix of human psychology, political genius, and sometimes brutal entertainment. And trust me, what you're about to learn might make you look at our own modern world in a completely different light. So let's journey back 2,000 years to a time when emperors discovered that the key to controlling an empire wasn't just through force, it was through pleasure. A time when a simple combination of bread and blood sport would change the course of history. Are you ready to discover how Rome's emperors turned chaos into control? Let's begin this incredible journey together. Picture this. You're walking through the bustling streets of ancient Rome in the 1st century before Christ. The smell hits you first, a mixture of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and desperation. You're surrounded by towering apartment buildings called insulae, crammed with families living in conditions that would make modern slums look luxurious. Rome had become a victim of its own success. The mighty empire that had conquered the Mediterranean world now faced its greatest enemy, its own people. By this time, over 1 million souls called the Eternal City home, making it the largest urban center the world had ever seen. But here's the terrifying reality. Most of these people had absolutely nothing to do. You see, Rome's military conquests had flooded the city with cheap slave labor. Imagine being a Roman craftsman, trying to compete with workers who cost nothing but food and shelter. Impossible, right? Thousands upon thousands of free citizens found themselves jobless, watching as their livelihoods disappeared overnight. The irony was crushing. Rome's victories abroad were creating defeat at home. These weren't just numbers on a census. These were real people. Former soldiers who had bled for Rome, artisans whose skills had been passed down through generations, farmers who had lost their land to massive slave-worked estates. They crowded into the poorest districts of the city, packed like sardines in buildings that regularly collapsed or burned down. The social divide had become a chasm. While the wealthy elite lounged in their marble villas on the Palatine Hill, sipping wine from golden cups, the common people, the plebeians, struggled just to find their next meal. Some days they would gather in the Forum, their voices rising in angry chants that echoed off the ancient stones. The poet Juvenal, who lived through these turbulent times, captured the mood perfectly when he wrote those chilling words that would echo through history. The mob hates you. They want only 2 things, bread and games. He wasn't being poetic. He was issuing a warning that every Roman politician understood with crystal clarity. This wasn't just about hunger, though that was certainly part of it. This was about dignity, about purpose, about what happens when an entire class of people realizes they've become expendable in their own homeland. The plebeians weren't asking for luxury. They were demanding survival. And here's what made the situation truly explosive. These weren't uneducated peasants who could be easily dismissed. Many were veterans who knew how to fight, craftsmen who understood organization, citizens who remembered when Rome had promised them a share in its glory. They knew how to gather, how to plan, and most dangerously of all, they had nothing left to lose. The Roman elite could feel it in the air, that electric tension that comes before a storm. Without a solution, and soon, the greatest empire in history would tear itself apart from within. The very people who had built Rome's power were about to become the instrument of its destruction. This was Rome's ticking time bomb, and the countdown had already begun. But Rome didn't just sit there waiting for revolution to tear the empire apart. No, the Romans were far too clever for that. They came up with a solution so brilliant, so deviously effective, that it would echo through history as one of the greatest examples of political manipulation ever conceived. It all started with a young, idealistic politician named Gaius Gracchus back in 122 before Christ. Now, Gaius wasn't your typical Roman aristocrat. He genuinely cared about the suffering masses, and he had a radical idea. What if the government actually fed its own people? Revolutionary, right? Gaius pushed through the first grain law, the lex frumentaria, which allowed Roman citizens to buy subsidized grain at below-market prices. Think of it as the world's first government welfare program. But here's where it gets interesting. What started as genuine social reform quickly transformed into something much more sinister. Later emperors looked at Gaius's grain program and thought, why stop there? They turned it into a full-blown free lunch program. Augustus expanded it dramatically, and by the time Emperor Trajan was in power, the system had become absolutely massive. They called it the Annona, essentially Rome's Department of Food Distribution. Picture this incredible operation. Massive grain ships sailing from the fertile fields of Egypt, loaded with enough wheat to feed a small country. These vessels would dock at Rome's port of Ostia, and then armies of workers would transport the grain into the city. The Roman government was literally importing survival for over 200,000 citizens every single month. That's like feeding the entire population of a modern major city for free every day of the year. But the Romans understood something profound about human nature. A full stomach alone wasn't enough to keep people happy. You needed to occupy their minds, too. Enter the second half of the equation, the circuses. The Circus Maximus was Rome's answer to modern stadiums, except imagine it 10 times more spectacular. This massive oval could hold 250,000 screaming fans. That's more than 3 Super Bowl stadiums combined. The roar of the crowd during chariot races was so loud it could reportedly be heard from miles away. Then came the Colosseum, that iconic symbol of Roman excess. But calling it just an arena doesn't do it justice. This was entertainment engineering at its most sophisticated. They could flood the entire floor to stage full naval battles called naumachii, complete with real ships and real combat. Imagine sitting in those marble seats, watching actual warships ramming each other while gladiators fought to the death on deck. Emperor Nero, that master of spectacle and scandal, took things to absolutely insane levels. When political controversies threatened his rule, he'd simply throw a festival. Not just any festival. We're talking 100-day extravaganzas that made modern music festivals look like backyard barbecues, exotic animals from Africa, gladiators from across the empire, theatrical performances that lasted from dawn to dusk. Here's what's truly brilliant about this strategy. While the people were cheering in the stands, stuffing their faces with free bread, they weren't plotting revolution. They weren't questioning why their emperor lived in a golden palace while they crowded into crumbling tenements. They were too busy being amazed, entertained, and most importantly, fed. The Romans had essentially invented the perfect distraction machine. Free food kept bodies alive, and spectacular entertainment kept minds occupied. It was political genius disguised as generosity. But here's the question that should send chills down your spine. If this strategy worked so well for Rome, who else might be using it today? Now here's where things get really fascinating. The Romans weren't just throwing bread at hungry people and staging random fights for fun. No, this was psychological warfare at its finest. They understood something about human nature that would make modern politicians jealous. Picture this. You're a Roman citizen living in a cramped apartment building, struggling to make ends meet. Your job prospects are slim, the wealthy elites seem untouchable, and you're angry about the corruption you see everywhere. But then, every month, you get your free grain ration. And this weekend, there's an absolutely spectacular gladiator fight at the Colosseum, completely free of charge. The satirist Juvenal saw right through this brilliant manipulation. He wrote something that still gives me chills today. The people have long since traded their freedom for handouts. Think about that for a moment. An entire population willingly giving up their voice in government because they were getting free stuff and entertainment. But here's the most genius part of the whole system. During these massive spectacles, every single gladiator, every charioteer, every performer would bow toward the emperor's box. Imagine being in that crowd of 50,000 people, all watching as these warriors literally bowed down to your ruler. The message was crystal clear without anyone saying a word. This man up there is your provider, your protector, your everything. It wasn't just about the games themselves. It was about creating this almost religious reverence for imperial power. The emperor wasn't just a politician anymore. He was the guy who made sure you had food on your table and incredible entertainment every weekend. And here's where it gets really dark. The Romans became so addicted to this system that they started accepting absolutely terrible leaders, as long as the entertainment kept flowing. Take Emperor Commodus, for example. This guy was completely unfit to rule. He was obsessed with gladiator fighting, spent ridiculous amounts of money on his own ego, and basically ignored the actual business of running an empire. But you know what? The people loved him because he gave them the most extravagant games Rome had ever seen. The philosopher Seneca, who lived through some of this madness, made an observation that feels uncomfortably relevant today. He said, "A people addicted to pleasure are easily ruled." The Romans had discovered that if you keep people comfortable and entertained, they'll let you get away with almost anything. This wasn't just crowd control. This was the systematic rewiring of an entire society's priorities. The Romans learned to value immediate gratification over long-term thinking, spectacle over substance, and comfort over freedom. And the scariest part? Most of them didn't even realize it was happening. But here's the thing about quick fixes. They never last forever. And by the 3rd century after Christ, Rome's brilliant bread and circuses strategy was about to spectacularly backfire. Picture this. It's around 230 after Christ, and the Roman Empire is falling apart at the seams. The economy is in complete chaos. Inflation has gone absolutely insane. We're talking about prices doubling and tripling almost overnight. The government kept printing more and more money to pay for all those free grain shipments and massive gladiator spectacles. And surprise, surprise, the currency became basically worthless. But here's where it gets really ugly. The grain shipments from Egypt, which had been the backbone of the entire system for over 3 centuries, started failing. Pirates were attacking supply ships, rebellions were breaking out in the provinces, and sometimes there just wasn't enough grain to go around. Imagine being a Roman citizen who had grown up expecting that monthly grain ration, and suddenly it's not there anymore. The emperors were in an impossible situation. They were trapped by their own success. For generations, they had trained the Roman people to expect free food and entertainment. It wasn't just a nice bonus anymore. It was considered a basic right. Try taking away something people consider their birthright, and see what happens. Emperor Aurelian learned this lesson the hard way. This guy was actually a pretty capable ruler who genuinely tried to fix the empire's problems. He implemented serious economic reforms, tried to stabilize the currency, and attempted to cut back on the massively expensive entertainment programs that were bleeding the treasury dry. The reaction was swift and violent. The moment word got out that the games might be reduced or the grain handouts cut back, riots erupted in the streets of Rome. We're not talking about peaceful protests here. These were full-scale uprisings where angry mobs would storm government buildings and attack anyone who looked wealthy or official. Here's the really tragic part. Aurelian's reforms might have actually worked if given enough time. He understood that the empire needed to stop living beyond its means and start rebuilding its economic foundation. But the Roman people had become so dependent on their bread and circuses that they literally couldn't imagine life without them. It's like trying to take away someone's addiction cold turkey. The withdrawal symptoms were violent and immediate. The emperors found themselves in this vicious cycle where they couldn't afford to keep providing the handouts and entertainment, but they also couldn't afford to stop because the people would revolt. And here's the bitter irony. The very system that had kept Rome stable for centuries was now the thing destroying it. The bread and circuses had become a monster that was devouring the empire from within. Every emperor who tried to reform the system faced the same impossible choice: bankrupt the empire or face civil war. The lesson here is absolutely chilling. Rome had created a society so addicted to immediate gratification that it literally couldn't save itself, even when everyone could see the disaster coming. Short-term fixes had replaced long-term thinking so completely that the empire had lost the ability to make the hard choices necessary for survival. This wasn't just an economic collapse. It was a complete breakdown of civic responsibility and collective wisdom. The Romans had traded their future for comfort, and by the time they realized what they had done, it was already too late to turn back. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the roar of the Colosseum, the crowd screaming, blood on the sand, the emperor waving from his golden box. Now open them. Look around. The stadiums might be digital now, but the game hasn't changed. 2,000 years later, are we really so different from Rome's mob, trading our attention for cheap thrills and comfort? The Roman emperors knew one truth: a hungry, bored people is a dangerous people, so they gave them bread to quiet their stomachs and circuses to numb their minds. Today, swap grain rations for fast food drive-thrus. Swap gladiator fights for viral TikTok challenges. The formula is eerily familiar. Keep them fed, keep them entertained, keep them from asking too many questions. Historian Mary Beard put it bluntly: societies still trade critical thought for comfort. Think about it. How many hours do we lose scrolling, binge-watching, snacking on junk food, our modern panem et circenses? In ancient Rome, the Circus Maximus held 250,000 people. Today, a single viral tweet can reach millions in seconds. The scale has changed, but the distraction playbook? It's the same. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Rome's emperors didn't invent human weakness. They exploited it. Seneca, that sharp-tongued philosopher, saw it clearly. A people addicted to pleasure are easily ruled. Fast forward to today. Streaming services autoplay the next episode. Social media feeds endless outrage. Convenience trumps conscience. And just like in Rome, those in power profit from our distraction. Fun fact, the Colosseum's opening games lasted 100 days straight. Emperor Titus bankrupted the treasury to keep the people hooked. Sound extreme? Then explain why the average person now spends over 2.5 hours daily on social media. Our screens are the new arena. The thumbs up button? Our version of cheering for blood. So is this a human flaw or a tool of control? Maybe both. Rome collapsed when the bread ran out and the games stopped. But today, the circus never ends. The real danger isn't the distractions themselves. It's forgetting we're in the arena. Next time you reach for your phone or that late-night snack, ask yourself, am I being fed me or am I being managed? The emperors would be proud. What's your bread and circuses? Comment below. As our journey through ancient Rome comes to an end, we're left with a haunting question that echoes through the centuries. What was the true cost of keeping the masses entertained and fed? The emperors of Rome crafted what seemed like a perfect solution. Keep the people fed with grain from distant lands and dazzle them with spectacular shows of gladiatorial combat. On the surface, it worked brilliantly. The crowds cheered, the bread flowed freely, and the mighty Roman Empire maintained its iron grip on power. But beneath this glittering facade lay a darker truth. With each passing year, as more resources were poured into grander spectacles and larger grain shipments, Rome's foundation began to crack. The people, once proud citizens who participated in political life, slowly transformed into passive spectators, content to watch the empire's slow decline from their seats in the Colosseum. Think about it. When Emperor Nero staged his 100-day festival of games, he wasn't just entertaining the people. He was buying their silence, their compliance, their very souls. As the philosopher Seneca observed from his place in the imperial court, a population addicted to pleasure becomes frighteningly easy to control. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this tale is how familiar it feels. When we look at our world today, what do we see? Endless streams of entertainment at our fingertips, fast food delivered to our doors, and social media algorithms designed to keep us scrolling, watching, consuming. Are we really so different from those ancient Romans? Have we traded our civic engagement for modern bread and circuses? As you watch this video on your screen, perhaps while snacking on something delivered to your door, it's worth asking yourself, what are my bread and circuses? The lesson from Rome stands clear. No empire, no matter how mighty, can survive on spectacle alone. The bread and circuses policy wasn't just a strategy, it was a symptom of a deeper malady, a band-aid placed over the wounds of a dying empire. Before we part ways, I invite you to join our growing community of history enthusiasts here at Imperium Chronicles. Together, we'll continue exploring these fascinating parallels between past and present, uncovering the hidden stories that shaped our world. Like and subscribe to ensure you don't miss our next adventure into history's greatest mysteries. And please, share your thoughts in the comments below. What keeps you distracted in your daily life? What are the modern equivalents of Rome's bread and circuses? Let's start this important conversation together, because understanding our past might just help us shape a better future. Until next time, this is Imperium Chronicles, where history's echoes meet today's world.